I would say even now that the modality of what I do has shifted, and I have sort of, I guess, in a way, made an industry change or career change, if you will. Really, the impact that I want to have at the end of the day still stays the same. So I almost just see kind of my path as like the modality has shifted, but that end goal and that vision is still very, very intact for me. Um, so I think, yeah, it's funny because I purpose is twofold. It's like your modality and your impact. My modalities have shifted a billion times, but impact is right there. So I think that that would be my answer to that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam. On each episode of this podcast, I talk to people across different industries, primarily those who are Gen Z, about their story and the experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. I created Oh My Curry Goodness because I want to know more about a person's personal story and the good and bad experiences. That's actually why I came up with the name, because when we hear stories that are interesting, we say, oh my goodness. And then I could not hide my South Asian part, so I had to include curry one way or another. So, oh my curry goodness made sense. But regardless, I just want to know more about what it's like to be a person from their. I want to know more about a person's story and what it's like to be them. And I really hope that you guys, as listeners, join me in continuing to have these conversations because it's very easy to focus on who a person is based on their titles, but not so much on what they are, which is the fact that they're a human being. And let's talk about not just the good things, but also the challenges because these are some of the things that make human beings human beings. I also hope that people say, oh my curry goodness in the future, but that's a whole nother conversation. So continue to check back each and every week to learn from incredible people who are of the Gen Z generation, because even though we may be a young generation, that doesn't necessarily mean we don't have a story. Now, this week I'm speaking with Nistha Dube, who is a self-discovery speaker, author, and education reform activist. Nistha is someone that I've actually, of all the guests I've had on the podcast, she's someone who I've really been wanting to have on because not only has she focused on the idea of purpose, but she's also been a really good friend of mine. And on privately, I've said that Nistha is like the South Asian version of Oprah Winfrey. So I'm really excited to have Nistha. So Nistha, apart from my weird introduction, thank you so much for joining. Oh my curry goodness.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me, Umza. Yes, I feel like I can just attest to us having built a friendship for so long before even hopping on today. I feel like this is, if anything, been a long time coming and a long time overdue. So it's awesome to be here. That is so funny, the little comment. I was like, wow, this is news to me. I was not aware of that. That's a nice way to start my morning is to hear that comment. Yeah, Oprah is such an inspiration. I could never, but yeah, I'm honored. So I'm super excited to jump into the conversation. I agree. I think we as Gen Z really hold so much power in our story. I think we're a generation that is just so overwhelmed in either a good or a bad way with opportunity. And what we do with that, I think, is so powerful. Like those are the things that do make our personal brands, if you will. So just excited to, chat more about like really what it makes, to have a powerful story and what that can look like and how that can kind of change paths over time as well.
Of course, thank you so much. And yeah, that was something when it came down to the introduction part, I was just thinking it'd be really funny if I said South Asian Oprah because you kind of you have like I've like it's funny because I don't just treat guests as guests, I treat them as friends. And you are someone who's definitely been very open and welcoming. And it's weird because we've never met in person, so there's a
Yeah.
sense of like can you actually have that friendship? But you're one of those people where it's like, yeah, you can definitely you are someone who can welcome people with open arms and be the best friend you can be. So I've never met Oprah, but I feel like that's what she can have.
I feel like she's a cool person, so I'll take it as a compliment.
Awesome. All right. So first thing I want to talk about is the fact that before I know you recently had a career change, but I do want to talk about the past, if you will, because you did do something with motivational speaking and coaching. But more importantly, one of the things that is important to you is the idea of purpose. And at the time, I think you were trying to help people find their purpose, while you're also trying to find your own purpose, if you will. And so I want to ask you if I want to talk about, I guess, your personal journey when it comes to the word purpose from the moment you first heard that word, whenever that was, to as we were speaking today. Because to be quite honest with you, when I first heard the word purpose, I did not think of it as like a human being thing. It was more like, what's the purpose of a car? What's the purpose of this? Like when it comes to like, I guess, other objects, I think that answer is pretty obvious. Like, what's the purpose of a car? It's to drive from point A to point B. But then later on, it's like, what's the purpose of this person? Or like, why am I here? That's such a weirdly philosophical and also difficult question. So it's a weird journey with that word because I didn't think of it as person purpose until probably college when I started thinking about like what I want to do in my career and what do I want to do? What do I want to be remembered for? So talk me through about, I guess, what your personal relationship with that word looked like.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because I almost wonder if I will say I think my perspective of the word has changed through my own experience. I think when I first started the journey of being in like the social media space and making content back in 2020, when I graduated, I think to me, purpose was almost kind of like what you did. And it was an intersection of like the things that you're good at, the skill sets that you have, the dreams that you want to fulfill, where there's a gap in the world, and then what you're just naturally like known for and what you can monetize and make money out of. It was very much that ikigai intersection that I talk about so much in, the talks that I used to give. And I think how that's evolved over time is if you can find that, like you won the lottery, and that might be a 0.1% chance that you do find that. Um, I want to avoid using the word realistic, but I think from a more probable standpoint and like just over 99% of the population, like you really got to figure out, I mean, how to make those ends meet. And that might look really different. Like the way that you pay your bills could be completely different from the thing that lights you up. And that could be completely different also from what people recognize you for. And those could be three separate parts. So I would say you've hit a gold mine if you can find out how to intersect them. But if you can't, it doesn't mean that you don't have a sense of like purpose or you don't have a sense of like dharma, which we talk about more so like with the Gita and Eastern philosophy is really the concept of that is fulfilling the immediate duty that's right in front of you. It's this task in this moment. And so I think working with also like learning from the Vedic monk I work with, Swami, I've been working with for 4 years now, Swami Chitananda, like his work has helped me understand that like purpose is really just presence. It's immersing yourself into this moment and being of utmost service in this moment to the people around you. So I will say it's been like a culmination of understanding that like I was very, very, very lucky to be in a place in 2020 and 21 and 22 where I could combine those things. Like speaking lit me up. I got paid for it. People recognized me for it. I loved doing it and I was filling a gap in the world. Like that was very rare. And that's not again, I want to avoid using the word realistic, but that's not the reality for everyone. It really isn't. So I think my definition has evolved in the sense of like when you can just give yourself to this moment and show up in this moment with happiness and with service and gratitude and humility, you are walking a path of purpose. You are walking a path that's going to unfold into something that might not be like a destination you can even see at the moment, but it will get you to a place where you are operating, I think, in the most aligned version of yourself. But it has to be catered towards that presence. Like the presence has to be an anchor and the thought of how am I serving? When those two are an anchor, I think you just can't lose. Um, and if you have to monetize yourself in a completely different way through a completely different career to like uphold these crafts, cool. If you're someone who likes dancing and you're like, I don't know if I want to make a whole career out of this, you don't have to. Like, you can totally be a dancer and have a separate like career that keeps that income coming in. So I think, yeah, my definition has definitely evolved, but in a way, it also hasn't evolved because I still do see purpose as impact. Because when you're coming from that service-oriented place, you're always thinking about like, well, how is this serving people? In 2020, I would say really the impact of what I wanted my work to do was to help people tune into themselves, identify their own inner strengths, be able to really work through limiting beliefs to go after what they want. And I would say even now that the modality of what I do has shifted, and I have sort of, I guess, in a way, made an industry change or career change, if you will. Really, the impact that I want to have at the end of the day still stays the same. So I almost just see kind of my path as like the modality has shifted, but that end goal and that vision is still very, very intact for me. Um, so I think, yeah, it's funny because I purpose is twofold. It's like your modality and your impact. My modalities have shifted a billion times. My impact is right there. So I think that that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, and I want to ask you another question regarding purpose. And if I don't know, because I didn't send you this on the list of topics, but if it's a bad question, I can cut it off.
Mhm.
But just to spoil the party, Nista is South Asian, so just like me, which is one of the cool things. And so I don't have to ask you if you like Keurig. I already know the answer to that.
Of
But
course, I'm here.
I want to ask you because if like I guess picture like a Venn diagram where you have Nista's personal purpose and then South Asian purpose. Now, for those who don't know, and I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but like South Asian, not everybody, but like I guess maybe the conservative part of South Asia will say your purpose is getting married, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, pursuing, the Fantastic Four, if you will, science, technology, engineering, math. So there's that purpose. Then there's your personal purpose. And I think from a South Asian, I guess like the community I grew up in, if you focus on personal purpose, it either feels like you're not connected with your identity, or I guess because we're living in the United States, you're like whitewashed because it's like, I want to know about my personal purpose. So, what has that relationship been like? Have you felt like growing up, it was like, I need to choose one or the other? Or was there a way you
Mm.
were able to find out I can still have my South Asian purpose while also balancing my personal purpose?
These questions, by the way, I am so here for this. We're like 5 minutes into this conversation, and I'm blown away because yeah, these questions are really expanding me to think. Um, wow, I think first of all, I feel like I almost never even conceptualized it as like here's the expected purpose of what it is in my parents' eyes, and I think this is something that I would say I owe to my parents, and I'm just so grateful because fortunately that was never really kind of an expectation passed down from them. Like, obviously, yes, if you're in the South Asian world, then it's totally a thing with family, friends, and extended family, whatever. I was very, very fortunate where my parents were always like, hey, do what you like, do what you're good at. And from a young age, my mom was like, write a book, like writing is your thing. My dad was like, public speaking is your thing. So these skills that I was doing in my entrepreneurship journey are things that my parents really gave me that positive reinforcement for from a very young age. So I really owe the world to them for that because the whole STEM like dogma was not passed down to me. The pressure and the expectations to do that was not passed down to me. I studied neuroscience and behavioral science because I love learning about human behavior and I love the intersection between understanding neural wirings and why humans act in certain ways. Because at the end of the day, what did I want to do? I wanted to go out in the world and speak and host workshops and connect with people and talk about tuning into your inner self. And I wanted to do that from a scientific background because I think it's the coolest thing ever. And really, what is the world today if we don't have like an empirical way to back it up? So that was a personal choice. I think in terms of even the other things that you mentioned, like with getting married and having a house, I really lucked out with my parents because those are not conversations that we have at home. I think my parents really, maybe this is being an only child thing, like they really have a strong understanding of who I am and what my goals are and what I want at this stage of my life. And I think they work very hard in cultivating that for me. And right now I'm still very much in a stage of like really building my career, going to grad school, wanting to travel more and explore more and expand, my network and just meet people. And I think that's something that comes very innately to me, and that's something my parents have observed. Um, so they're all about cultivating just who I am. In terms of now extended family and family friends, Yes, those are conversations that come up. I do feel like I'm kind of like this like oddball when I walk into family friend gatherings where I tell people like, hey, these certain things maybe aren't priorities for the next like 6 to 7 years, and then see their reaction of like, what? Um, in terms of like how I navigate that, I think it's difficult. I think I definitely do feel like there is a lack of from a young age, I've always felt like there was a lack of connection with my identity in terms of just being Indian. Like, I've always felt that. I felt that because I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. I went to a predominantly white high school, middle school, elementary school, the whole thing. Um, yeah, it's funny. I've always really struggled with that. And I'm just really grateful because I think like my parents again always kind of kept me very culturally, religiously aware. They taught me how to read and write Hindi when I was little. I still know how to read and write Hindi, speak it fluently with my family members, watched like Desi movies growing up every single day. Just so many parts of it. Like I said, I'm grateful to be learning under Swami Chitananda and like so many of the, religious cultures and customs we very much regularly follow here as a family. So it's something that I'm very, very attuned to. Whenever I go back to India, family members like see that the Gita and Eastern philosophy and even just like reading and writing in Hindi and Sanskrit is so infused into like my daily spiritual practices, and they're shocked. They're like, "Oh my gosh, this girl is in the States and she's doing all of these things." But then my friends who are in the States think that I'm whitewashed because I don't watch like every Bollywood movie. So it's a very interesting dichotomy I've had to deal with. To answer the last part of your question, where you're like, how does that now merge with like can you have both? I think you can. I know people who have literally picked and like chosen from every like each one. I think that's up to you. I think you can choose. Like in some ways you could say that I kind of tailor towards both because I do have a college degree in the STEM field. Like I did study neuroscience that is reputable. I am applying to grad school. But at the same time, I took these like really big risks and I kind of like made a career off of social media and I took that and flew to a different city and my extended family was like, what is this girl doing with her life? And it was a constant thing every day of like, oh, well, is she not gonna do a master's or a PhD? And at that time, I really wasn't in the mindset to even think about those things. I was full sending the business. So um now you could say I'm in a place where I've kind of like tailored towards both. I never think you can tailor to every single aspect of both. I think you find a happy medium and that's up to you. Um, but yeah, I will say like if you have some kind of a community that can recognize what you need and who you are, even if that's one friend or that's one mentor, hold them closely and really, really just express your gratitude to them. Because if you're in a surrounding environment where you don't have that support and you do want to like take all these big risks, go after these big dreams, you need some kind of sense of support, like something, even if you find a community group online, like a Facebook group of, I don't know, let's say you want to be a nomad or whatever it is, like there's the world's your oyster. There's so many online communities, but find something, hold it close, have that be a consistent part of your daily lifestyle. Um, because sometimes security is what helps us take risks as well. And in my case, like I said, my security was my parents. They always kind of recognized it from day one, but not everyone has that. So find what works for you and try and create pockets and spaces where you can have a sense of security, but then also allow yourself this sense of like exploration or nonconformity or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I want to touch on what you said, but like, I guess so. I'm Bengali. Like, my parents are from Bangladesh, and which is an actual country, by the way. Unfortunately, some people think that's India, which that's a whole nother discussion. But I would say somewhat like for me, I haven't read or I don't know how to read Bengali. I don't know how to write in Bengali. I don't know how to speak it. So I'm on that learning curve, and it's difficult and heartbreaking at the same time because a lot of my friends can speak Bengali, and then my relatives back in Bangladesh, they can speak in Bangla and speak in English, and I'm just fully English. I think one time, the last time I went to Bangladesh, which was 2022, I was like, should I speak? And I went to my mom, should I speak in Bengali? And it's like, no, just speak in English. And then my brother, when he heard me speak Bengali, he's like, you speak like a white person. So I'm like, okay, I really need to go through this Bengali process. So I know that's not what I know. I went on a little rant. As far as the purpose for on my end, it's interesting because I would say my parents were supportive, but I think the best term is cautiously supportive, meaning they'll support you, but it's almost like, are you sure you got this? Because my dad is a computer science major, and while I am also a computer science major, I don't I don't think he's ever seen anyone do podcasting. So it's like, you sure you got this? And it's like, for the most part, I think I know what I need to do, despite the challenges that come with podcasting, whether it's internally, like editing, or growing it. But I would say extended family, or not even extended family. I don't usually talk to them about the podcast, but definitely like parents, friends, there is an expectation, whether it's like, hey, when you graduate from college, you're going to do this and you're going to get X amount of money, right? Or, are you getting married? Which is what a weird question to ask someone. And it's so weird that these are conversations. And then the other part, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I know I started college. I'm at Ohio State, but I'm actually a fifth year student, which I also feel like is a stigma because it feels like if you're taking longer than 4 years, usually, then it also seems like you're stupid or you're not capable enough. And so there is these expectations, but from a personal standpoint, as much as I hate doing schoolwork for college, I've also found to be one of my favorite years to date because I've met so many friends
Mhm.
that I developed a really good friendship. It's not just like for school purposes, but like personal friendship purposes. So
Yeah.
it's weird. Like there is the expectation that people have of you, and then there's the expectations you have of yourself. And it's hard because you don't want, because if it's like, if you're like if I go for personal purpose, it feels like I'm detaching myself from people, and I'm a people pleaser, so
Mhm.
I'm worried about that constantly.
Yeah.
But then there's also the sense of if I try to connect with another group, then am I connecting with myself? So I don't know, it's a weird relationship. And I know I kind of sounded philosophical, which is another thing I usually say on this podcast, but it is definitely a weird relationship.
Yeah, yeah. Like I think you hit the nail on the head with like at some point when you do choose like your inner self and the things that you want, if that doesn't resonate with the community around you, yeah, that gets very isolating. And like finding the balance between that connection and then the connection with yourself. Again, if you're not already in a community where you feel like that culture is there of that exploration and the growth and whatever, that's really difficult. I notice I experience that when I'm in my hometown. When I was living in LA, I felt like I was just home and I was like in this whole sea or swarm of like absolute chaos and individualism, which oddly felt like home the second I arrived there. And I've never really felt that way ever in my hometown, to be very honest. So, uh, that's kind of going back to what I said about like environment and community is everything. If you can even find like if you're not currently in an environment where that's just like the city bleeds and breathes that kind of air, like you can find pockets and spaces to cultivate that, even if it's that one friendship or online community spaces or forums or whatever. Like our friendship was virtual, and I feel like we shared so many, like, I don't know, even like personal conversations outside of like this.
Absolutely. And before we talk about things you're doing now, I do want to mention, because I know you talked about in the past, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but you were involved in motivational speaking and career coaching in general. And I want to ask what was a memory or maybe a set of memories that meant a lot to you, because I know emotions can be a very strong thing, not maybe for thinking reasons, but maybe for like, you remember a certain thing, and because of that memory, it kind of inspires you to keep going. It's similar to how I've had professional soccer players on this podcast, and one question I'll ask them is like, what was a game they remember playing or watching, and you remember that emotion or feeling so much that it inspired you to be a professional soccer player? Because it's
Mhm.
like, I remember this reaction, it meant so much that even though it didn't make sense to anyone else, it made so much sense to me.
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
you're not an athlete, but as when you were involved in that speaking and coaching area or field, what was a memory where you were like, okay, no one understands this, but this means so much to me. And at the time, I thought to myself, I want to continue doing this as much as I can or as long as I can.
Yeah, I love this question as well. I love how like unique these like just everything that you're posing because it's really getting me to think about so many aspects of the journey that I feel like I haven't even fully like vocalized or conceptualized before. So this is really cool. I think one thing that immediately stands out to me was you know, in Vegas, they have those like shows, and you just like, so my parents and I, back when I was like, this was like 10 years ago, I was really underage. So, like, the things that I did in Vegas were very wholesome. But, like, we went to Vegas and we went to like this like magic show, and it was very like wholesome family vibes. And there was this one, like, I guess she was like yeah, she was a magician. She was a woman magician, which was rare because I think most of them are males, and she came onto the stage and she just had this like really like fun, cool like magic show. And at the end, she gave like an inspiring talk. And she just took the microphone and she was like to all the young girls in the audience and like went on this whole spiel. And I feel like everyone was just like, oh, cool, like so wholesome. There's your guy. And I was there and I was like on the verge of tears, trying not to sob and taking everything like I had in me to not start bawling. And I'm like, why is this moving me so much? Like I am in Vegas right now at a magic show. Like why am I crying in the audience? This like I didn't understand. It was like my reaction to a Nicholas Sparks novel. And I was like, why am I so moved by this? And it was just like a 5 minute thing. Like it wasn't part of her like act or anything. It was just kind of like an aside at the end. And I was like, wow. Um so I had that moment, and then I've had these like deeply emotional moments where I literally feel crazy that I'm so moved by them. Even in like movies, and my friends will always roast me for it. They're like, okay, yeah, well, like there's no reason you should be sobbing at this scene, but it'll be like the most like melancholy kind of like happy scenes of a movie where I feel like the character either kind of like finds their power or like rises to the occasion or steps up to the plate. It's like always like that climax or that turning point. And then yeah, there's been a couple of them. I feel like I've had more in-person ones as well. Where like when I see people accepting a position that they've worked so hard for, I get so emotional by it that I'm like, what's like, what is this telling me? Why am I so emotional and moved by this? Um, a person accepting an award, like at the Grammys or Oscars, this is like I'll just start bawling, and I'm like, what is it about this arc? Like there's something deeper, and I think it's seeing someone being in recognition of their own strengths and abilities, having the discipline and consistency and courage to go after it, and now being recognized for it and being in a place where maybe they themselves thought, wow, I never thought I would get here. I remember, I forget which celebrity this was. I'm sure like a lot of them have felt this way because I've done this, but they go up and they accept their awards. And one of them was like, yeah, like 15 years ago, this used to be a shampoo bottle. And I was like rehearsing the speech in my shower, and yeah, I just start bawling because I'm like, that must feel so special and so rewarding. So, like going back to your initial question of like, what really are those moments for me? I think it's moments where I'm just like, this is interesting how, like, I observe how moved I am. And then I wonder, like, what is that telling me about potentially, like, not only the work that I could be doing on myself and for my own future, but also how am I creating that ripple effect that other people can feel that way about themselves. I think there's a few people who really got me inspired to even start the journey, specifically Haley Hoffman Smith. I think her content and her charisma and her just absolute, utter, like consistent belief and faith in herself. She's a content creator and motivational speaker, author, and coach on like social media as well. She's a year older than me. Her content is what kept coming up on my feed in 2020. And I remember seeing her stuff and being like, oh, if like someone my age can believe in herself this much, then I can do it too. It was an absolute ripple effect. And I'm sure she has mentors she's been inspired by. So yeah, I think there's interesting moments of like feeling deep inspiration and feeling like this inspiration could create a turning point for my own actions and for what I see for myself.
Yeah, I just blanked out. I was gonna say it's weird because emotions are such a when I say confusing, it's more like a good sense of confusion because only you know it. And I share the same boat. I also resonate with you when it comes to movies or shows where you're like not maybe not necessarily sobbing, but you remember that scene so much. And some other people might go, "Why is that such an important scene to you?" But to me, it just does. And I know that like because these like movies are like they kind of have that like they're kind of like you know that there was a climax or other scene where it's like, oh, here comes that grand amazing scene, but it's always nice to see what that scene looks like because from a broad sense we know it exists, but what does it look like? So it's
Yeah.
definitely a an interesting thing to talk about when you mention movies and TV shows. And I'm not someone who's been aware of the other people you've mentioned, so I'll definitely look to check that out. But yeah, it's emotions are just such a weird thing. And yeah, I don't know what else to
Yeah,
say.
I think they're stories. I think they're information. I think they're data. I think they're like a collection of your past experiences. I think they're like intuitive doorways into what could be possible in the future. Like, I think there's so much to explore with emotions, which is why, like, I guess anyone listening, if you feel overly moved by certain things and you're like, I'm observing that within myself, and maybe like that's not the same reaction for my surrounding environment. What is this telling me?
I want to now go to the present, and I was very when I was talking to you about this, I know that this was something that you were very passionate about, but then things started not or think then there started a challenge that you had to go through. And I will admit that there was a part of me that was not listening to that. That's why I probably blanked out because I was like, okay, how do I talk about this? Because I know this is something you did in the past and you were passionate about it, but then you then had these challenges that you went through. And so I guess to start off, and I know this is like I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable in any way. So I'd love to know when things were first not going your way, when you started noticing like there was an issue, what was the initial response? And then when did you realize that the things that you were becoming passionate, when you were going through these challenges, when did you realize it became more serious? I hope that makes sense. I was just trying to figure out like what's the best way to do this without making it seem like it's an extremely terrifying answer or question.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're fine. So I think for me, really like it was a very interesting momentum that I had from 2020 or yeah, 2020 to 2022, where I feel like almost everything that I had on my vision board or everything that I could have possibly imagined myself, like I guess like accomplishing or experiencing over the following years was very much unfolding in real time in front of my eyes, quite quickly actually. So I want to say like 2020, I started making content. By next year, I was very, very grateful to have connected with a close friend through one of my pieces of content who introduced me to her friend, who was the founder of a digital agency. Um, got on a call with that founder, and then within like that first 30 minutes, she's like, are you ready to hop on a flight to LA and to relocate here in 2 months? I was like, say less, let's go. So I went there and it was just such a wonderful opportunity. I love the team that I work with. I got to live in a city of creators and entrepreneurs and hustlers and individualists and people who are nonconformists. And I felt like I was at home for the first time. Um, and things were moving quite quickly with like all of the other moving parts. I felt like I had a whole coaching practice. I had this amazing job in LA. I was living in this dream city. The apartment that I first lived in for the first few months, it was like this really cool, like shared creator community type of like immersive housing that's really good for people first moving into LA. So it was just people in their 20s of different backgrounds, like coming to LA for the first time. So I had really good relationships with them. Um, and everything was just going great. I was like flying out to give talks to different universities and getting paid for it. Like I was very much in 2022, I would say living my absolute dream life that I was like, I didn't know this was possible in 2 years. Like, how? Thank you, God. Thank you, universe, whatever. But truly, just in awe that it moved that quickly. And I feel like as quickly as it moved is as quickly as the decline began, because then soon enough, it was just like things in LA slowly started to fall apart. Yeah, so it was just kind of like one thing after the next holistically was like not working out in LA. Very soon into like that experience where I thought, wow, this is really going to be my place. This is going to be my home. This is going to be my city. I'm going to make it here. In every aspect, I would say in the professional aspect, I would say in terms of like the personal stuff, terms of like my housing, my job, all of that was just kind of like really not staying together. And I think my initial instinct wasn't really to be like, oh, this is suddenly the wrong path. I think my initial instinct was like, cool, this is part of the journey. We keep pushing. Like that's it. I feel like that's how I am when it comes to my career. If there's obstacles or challenges, I'm like, nope, they're not there. Like, cool, we reroute, we figure it out, whatever. So I wasn't really like freaking out. And again, this comes from a place of absolute privilege because I know that I have my amazing parents to come home to in Virginia and a house to come home to in Virginia if anything ever happens. Um, and I'm not going to be on the streets like trying to make ends meet, right? So like I had that survival, safety, security need met already in the back of my mind while all of this was happening for me in LA. Um, Immense privilege. So yeah, those things were just kind of like all falling apart. I was like, okay, well, then maybe I can just go home for a bit. Like I don't have to stay in the city if it's like this bad all at once. But to me, it never meant anything about making a career switch. It was just like, okay, cool. I can just go home and figure it out. That's fine. Um, and so it was an interesting thing for the next year of like going home and then coming back to LA and going home and coming back to LA. And I think even in that time frame, like I was really pushing the entrepreneurship journey and things just weren't sticking in that journey. I kept pivoting. I kept trying different models. I put out like a PR agency. I started this like self-discovery based startup, which was more of like a gamified version of self-discovery. It was a really cool concept that one of my friends in LA had, and we co-founded together and went into business there. And again, it just felt like every time I started one of these things, it would get traction or it would pick up. And then soon enough, it's like things wouldn't stick, or my intuition would be like, why is there suddenly a decline or a plateau in my own interest level in this? Like I almost felt like I was forcing myself to stay in this journey of being a full-time entrepreneur and living in LA. That's what it felt like towards the latter end of my stay there. It was very different from the initial momentum that took me there. And so I think really when I came to terms with the fact that like no matter what I tried, no matter how many times I pivoted in my business, I remember like even after I moved home from all of that, I went to a business conference in Nashville, met my amazing business coach there. We started brainstorming ideas for the following months. And like my intuition was just like, this is not the time. This is not the time. This is not the... And I could feel myself forcing and forcing and forcing. So I think it was coming to terms with the fact that's where I was. I was living in a reality of forcing. None of these different variations of like pivots and different ideas and business models I was trying were actually working out. Um, Anytime that I went back to LA, it was just like a series of unfortunate events that would happen in such a quick elapsed time frame that I'm like, this is weird. I'm almost just going to take this as divine intervention that maybe this is not the place or it's not the time, and that's okay. Um, so yeah, I would say accepting that took me like another year, really. So like midway through 2023, end of 2023, I would say, yeah, about a year ago at this time is when I really came to full acceptance of like, all right, we're gonna take a full break from trying to make any of this work right now. Which is why I say like the modality has shifted because I think my purpose is still intact. I think at the end of the day, I still know that I want to make a difference in people's lives in terms of like helping them go inwards and create a sense of self-awareness, identification of their strengths, really promote what self-discovery means and specifically help the youth understand that. I was working with so many high school and college students in my personal coaching practice, and I would love to take that into like schools and education systems. So yeah, I think coming back last year, it was like, all right, well, if I'm going to give this entrepreneurship journey a pause, then how do I still build my resume, build my experience, build my skill sets and my network in this realm of, okay, I want to change really what self-discovery means for the youth. Yeah, and that's kind of what led me to my current like amazing jobs today, where I'm working at a cognitive center with students who have a wide variety of backgrounds and profiles when it comes to learning. Some of them maybe have learning disabilities, so ranging from, anywhere from ADHD to like history of epilepsy, stroke, and working with them really to talk about like what are different ways that we can build their cognitive muscles. How do we implement mindfulness into this like overall thing, confidence and self-esteem, really allowing them to kind of have that skill set so that they can take that into their classrooms and schools. So it's cool. We'll definitely talk more about that because I think you have a couple questions following probably about current day stuff. But I think that was the pivot. It was understanding that at some point I was forcing and it was a detriment to my mental and my physical health. And I could see that in front of me. And it was just a matter of my ego having to accept that that was the case.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think one thing that comes to mind is when you, I mean, everyone, whatever, regardless of what people pursue, it, you feel like they're like, oh, it's okay, I got this. Like it's a small setback, but I know I'm going to overcome it at some point. But then there's also this idea, there's also the fact that there are bigger obstacles that you're not able to overcome, and it forces you to think differently and understand that should I pivot? Should I continue going? Should I start all over? And it's funny because when we were talking about recording for the podcast, one of the things that you did say was that this idea of starting over. And I want to know from your perspective I want to know from, well, it's an obvious question, but how are you doing right now in the sense that would you say that this idea of starting over, especially in your 20s, I think it's I think it's easy to tell yourself that it's not a waste of time. It's more of it's just ending a chapter and wait, what's the analogy? I can't do it. It's like you're putting an end to one, you're ending a chapter of your book and you're starting a new chapter. I hope that's the right thing. English majors,
It
please
works.
don't
It
come
works.
after me. But like it's very easy to say like it's just a okay, we're gonna end this chapter, we're gonna focus on a new chapter. But it's also easy to think that when you're telling other people that you're starting over, it feels like you just wasted X amount of years because it never worked out. So how are you doing really? Do you feel like you are you in that do you feel like a part of you saying I just wasted X amount of years, or are you able to tell yourself like truly, regardless of what other people might say, that it's not a waste of time. It's just this chapter closed and I'm getting ready to open a new chapter in my book. Speaking of books, by the way, she does have a book. Nista does have a book, I think, called Beyond the Skin. Haven't got that yet, but I
All
heard that's really
right.
good. So I'll definitely check it out. But yeah, I just had to say that.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, thank you. Yes. I was dying because you really hit me with like the how are you doing really? And I was like, oh, okay, we're going there. But no, I would say I love that you mentioned the whole like potential thought of like, could this be wasted time? Is that like a perspective that either myself or like other people around me might view that journey kind of like through that lens? And I think I mean, I struggled with that for so long. I feel like I still sometimes struggle with it, but not really, fortunately, not as frequently because internally I'm in such a better place now, knock on wood, thank God. But yeah, I would say when I first moved back home last year with absolutely no idea of what was next, it's about moved home. There's about 5 months until I really started my job. 6 months until I really started getting the paycheck. So there was like there was a solid amount of time. Like there were those months where I was like, I don't know. Like I don't know what's next. That absolute sense of surrender to something bigger than me. Yeah, that was probably the biggest test of my life. And I will say that's just because in 2020, when I started this journey, my ego. And when I use the word ego, I kind of, yeah, I used it like a few minutes ago. I kind of mean it from more of like a psychological, almost like I don't want to use the word spiritual, but almost psychological spiritual, where your ego is just kind of your logical mind that keeps you safe, like it's working to keep you safe. So it's not so much like, oh, ego, like I'm stuck up in this like whatever realm where I think I'm better than everyone else, but ego is more of like these are thoughts or beliefs or fears that I formed, and these are all to keep me safe. So ego is always operating out of fear. It's a little bit more like of a psychological definition as opposed to like the way that we would use it in common English. So, um, yeah, when my ego had identified with like all these external things, right? Like my ego had identified with like, okay, I'm finally this motivational speaker. I live in LA. I got this high-rise apartment. That was like the second place that I lived after the first like housing experience I talked about. I basically was living in this beautiful apartment that was like a dream for my 20s. Um, yeah, full-time entrepreneur after like I had left my initial job at LA and I was going into business with really like my best friend at the time. So I was living this life that was like check, check, check off all the boxes. And like I said, it just kind of like really fell apart in every direction. And so my ego had a field day because it was like, oh, all of those things that we identified with, and all of those things that we thought we were, and all of those things that we thought like this was going to be life. Yeah, the universe was like, ah, you thought, just kidding. And really, I had to start from scratch, like purely from scratch. And that wasn't just an external journey, that was more so an internal journey of being like, what were the past 4 years of my life? What went wrong? We had so much momentum. Things were going so well. I'm so confused. I'm so lost. I don't know what changed. I know I'm trying in every way, every which direction to bend over backwards. I have this business coach. I have amazing mentors. There's no reason we should be here. Like absolutely no reason. Um, yeah, and so it came to a point of like, okay, well, what haven't we tried yet? And that was like, let's just take a break from all of this. Let's just take a break from social media. Actually, I permanently deleted my TikTok. I put all my other social media stuff on private. I archived all my content. And that was the most at peace I had felt in a very long time. Like my friends noticed it in me. They're like, wow, you're so at peace. I was like, yeah, I feel that way, interestingly. But obviously there was that big question mark of like, okay, well, what is my career now? What am I doing now? I have to start applying to jobs. I'm like applying, applying, applying. And then I finally, after like 6 months of that in January, I got the amazing job that I have right now at the cognitive center that I work at with kids that I was talking about earlier. Um, and this was where that kind of Bhagavad Gita, Eastern philosophy principle really, because what my Swami says is it's one thing to read the Gita, but you only know the Gita when you live it. Like you only know the Gita when you embody the Gita. That was my experience at the cognitive center to live the Gita in the sense of like, okay, what actually is purpose? This is so cool because this is going back to our initial question. What is like dharma? Like, what is that? It's showing up to your present duties with utmost surrender, humility, and service, right? And I was like, okay, that's what this is. Like, that's what this is. We don't know what's going to come after, but I know that I can show up every day, going to this job, showing up in absolute service with these students, knowing this is related to like, my grad school applications, because I would then go on to study neuroscience as well, so that I could eventually go back into like the whole speaking space and, again, similar end goals, but I was like, all right, the trajectory is just slightly different now. Um, and that was that. It was like, how do I show up every day? And I actually have a shift later today, right after we get off the call. I'm going to start getting ready and going in. And it's like such a different world from the life that I lived in LA, where I'm like, I never thought that I would be back in my hometown after moving out and having my dream life at my parents' house, driving into like my job in person. Getting paid like a quarter of the rate that I was for like my speaking coaching stuff, right? Like it's such an ego trip, and that's how I know that I am in a place of embodying the Gita. Like the Gita really talks about this all the time, like the ego destruction, showing up with surrender, showing up with humility, and um it's so interesting because I'm living it. Now I would say a year after, it's really cool that we're doing this because I've been at home for just about a year now. September 3rd was my 1 year of moving back home. And in that year, I tried to like really, really make peace with being here. I was like, I'm gonna try cool new activities, hobbies I've never done before, connect with friends, say yes to every invitation, show up to this job like with the utmost sense of like, this is my routine, this is my life. Cool, we're grateful for it. And I did all of those things. And I feel like I really got to a place of like being very at peace with being here. It's still not my ideal like end goal by any means, but it's a place that I feel like I kept running away from. It's a reality I felt like I kept running away from, and I don't feel that need anymore. I feel like a very internal calm. So yeah, I would say like that's kind of where I am. You get to this place when you're just like pushed to the ends of really understanding the only thing that can change is like your internal compass and your internal decision making. I don't think I would have gotten to this place had things not fallen apart as drastically as they did. There was like a timeline where I'm sure I'm still trying to figure out an entrepreneurial idea if I it hadn't gone this way. Um, but it did, and like it's cool. It's part of my story, and like that's what I want to sit here with you today and talk about. And I almost wonder, like, is that why our podcast got pushed for so long? Like on both of our ends, like, right? Like we tried to schedule this for so long. I'm like, I wonder if and the topic that we were going to do when we first connected was so different from this. I think it was more so just like about that journey, like the past, because this stuff hadn't transpired yet, and now it has. Um, yeah, because I remember sending you that voice note like over a year ago, being like, "Hey, that I'm just not in that world anymore, so I can't do the podcast." And now here we are, and it's talking about the journey after. So yeah, I do think like going back to your intro, these stories are so powerful. Like we again have an overabundance of options in this world, and it's like you can just choose any kind of path that you want, and when it doesn't work, what does the story become after? There's still other paths. There's always doors kind of like waiting to be opened.
It's what's interesting about your answer was that it, in a way, answered the next two questions I wanted to ask you, which was, what would you say the experience you're doing now has given you that maybe you not have found in the past? And you talked about this idea of peace, and then it was also interesting because you talked about future ambitions, and you said that you would at some point maybe want to revisit that entrepreneurial journey. So that's really interesting. But so that's I kind of find it interesting and funny because it's like I was going to ask you that, and then you answered it for me. But I would say the peace part really sticks out because it almost feels like because you're so passionate about this and you love it so much that like you feel like a part of you is gone, but it also in a way maybe it makes you feel better. And it's interesting because I had a musician and she's a musician and a muralist a few weeks back, and I asked her, if you were to take creativity out of your life, what would you lose? And the interesting answer she said was that she would be at peace because even though she's involved in this work, that it does take a lot of time and energy, and it takes a lot of energy basically. And so by taking that out, you're almost at peace in knowing that you don't have to worry about it as much. So I guess it may not resonate with what you're currently experiencing or went through, but I thought that was really interesting in the sense that you kept talking about peace because it feels like it's not a loss per se. It's more like it's like I'm okay. And okay being like while you're not happy that things didn't go out the way that you worked that things didn't go out the way you wanted to, that you don't feel as difficult about it because this is your chance to figure out who you are and how to move on from there or how to move on from that challenge.
Yeah, yeah, and don't get me wrong, like my friends saw it, my parents saw it, my first probably like 6, 7, 8 months of being here, I was just like, I straight up was like, oh, I failed. Like I failed. Yeah, rock bottom. I was like, what went wrong? Why didn't it work out for me? I was living in that for a while. But I think like it's really one of those things you just go through. Like you understand the lesson really once you go through it. So I think the place I am right now, yeah, it helps because I've built that like stability, I've built that routine, I've like made those friendships, those connections, I've like created like those social groups and routines outside of work. Um, and yeah, I just feel like I'm kind of ready for that next journey. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I feel that from within me. It's like, all right, I'm closing out this chapter now. I've made peace with it. I've done my time. I think it was an amazing lesson, and I do feel like I'm pivoting into something else. So I'm looking forward to like the unfolding of that and getting to like, share that with you because yeah, I think there's always things that are like ever unfolding for all of us. So hopefully like this place and where I'm at right now can be of resonance or insightful in some way to like people listening.
A couple of questions before I let you go. Now, the first one is it's similar to the question how I asked you when you were first doing the motivational speaking and career coaching, coaching in general, that I asked you about like what was a memory that meant a lot to you. And now that you're working in behavioral science and education and you're working with children, what would you say has been a memory during the time that you've been working here currently? What would you say is like a memory that made you feel like emotional? Because
Yeah.
there's the past version where you're like, oh, I remember doing this and it made me feel so good. What about the present? Like, is there one that where you're like you were working with someone, a kid, or a child, whoever that may be, that after working with them, you were like, oh my gosh, again, none of you guys understand this, but this means so much to me.
Yeah. Also before we get into that, I totally realized that I hadn't even really properly answered that last question because I hadn't shared my own like when I answered that last question about a moment that made me emotional with that journey, I realized I never shared it about myself. I shared like things that inspired me and made me emotional. Is that okay? Like
Oh yeah,
to
that's fine. Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. Because I have one from my actual journey too, where I got really emotional after like my first keynote speech. I don't know if you want me to like
If you
talk
want,
about
it's totally up to you.
Okay. Because I was like, oh shoot, did I totally misunderstand the question and just answered like not what you were trying to get at, basically.
You're good.
Um, I'm thinking it could be cool to maybe talk about because in this scenario, the question I'm about to answer about my present day, I am going to answer about like an actual like my own experience with the kids. So maybe like I could just quickly talk, like answer the last one, and you could just plug this in there. That's cool.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Um, So I'm just going to answer as if you've asked me that last question, and you can take this over. Um, so I would say like one memory that I think really stood out in terms of like the speaking journey for me was my first keynote speech. This was actually a really cool opportunity I had thanks to my speaking agent, Joe Johnston, where I actually got to go to Utah State University and give their keynote speech about like mental health. So specifically, my speech was around like self-love and purpose, and it was just really cool. It was like a room of like 200 graduate students. I was super, super nervous. My voice was shaking. I hadn't been on a stage in a while because of the pandemic. It was a lot of nerves, but it was just an awesome experience. I feel like I met so many other cool like speakers and um, artists and like professors who kind of came on stage and share their talent. And it was interesting because ever since I was a kid, I always had this like envision of what I wanted to be in the future for like career day and stuff. And I would always like imagine myself on stage with a microphone and like weird, like I could see the auditorium setup. I could see like the darkness of the auditorium with like these blue like lights. I don't know why. I could see that from like when I was a kid. I was like, that's gonna be my future one day. And that experience for me giving the keynote speech at Utah State, the stage was set up exactly that way. And there were the blue lights. And I was like, this is literally what I've been envisioning since I was 4 years old when I've been asked this question of what my dream career is. And I'm getting to do it at 23. Like, this is when I was still living in LA and I flew out from LA to give that speech. And, um, like, yeah, I remember going to my hotel room after, and that's when, like, I was just bawling. I was like, this is what I've wanted my whole life. And I lived it. And I like had a little like the video recording from it. And I remember like watching that over and being like, that's what I had always envisioned for myself. So that I would say was probably like a very emotionally rewarding moment for me from like my whole entrepreneurship journey. Um, okay, so we can cut that and then I'll go into like I'll go into answering your current question, which is like emotional now with my job and stuff. Um, In terms of like, I would say a moment that made me really emotional, at least with my current job. I can remember it because it was like probably a few months ago. Obviously, we work with kids with a variety of like neurological backgrounds, and without getting too into detail, like I do have a student who has like quite a chronic history of just learning disability and a very vast like neurological profile, and that's kind of like really caused impediments in school performance and testing for him. And so one of the things that we started working on 6 months ago was literally just like learning how to read. And that started from even identifying single letters and like writing out single letters and then double letters, understanding how to sound them and blend them. And that was a challenge. That was a big challenge. It was definitely like something I worried about as well, given like the age he was at and kind of where we were. And I was really worried, like, how are we going to move forward with this? And I remember like a couple months after, in the place that we are right now, I actually just was working with him yesterday. Literally, we're just writing out 5 letter words. Like I'm just telling him the words and he's writing them out. And I'm like, this is such a cool change to see within a span of a few months. Given the student's like background, given where he is in school, his scores on like the specific like cognitive assessments that we give at the center. I remember that moment where I was just like now giving out 4 or 5 letter words, or I was giving him a story, and like without my help, he's like reading these advanced stories, and it's just such a transformation to see. And I couldn't believe it watching in front of my own eyes because when I first interviewed at the center, the directors told me they were like, "Well, yeah, this program really works," and it does. The like standard deviations that we have in terms of like students' performance before and after, it just beats other cognitive centers by a landslide. So it's very effective, but I was getting to see that now in front of my own eyes, like that actual impact. And I remember just feeling so like I was like tearing up because I'm like, what, like, wow, we got here so fast, and it's so cool to see, and this program really does work. And these are the immediate effects that we're having on these students' lives. And yeah, we're kind of in conversations right now, again, not to get too personal, but with like schools about now taking this student's current testing and reports and really pushing for certain policy changes in terms of like where he should be in school right now, and getting to even like first-handedly witness those conversations that we have in terms of like calling into the schools and advocating for these students' needs in a school system that might not be like equipped to handle learning disabilities. I think that's the coolest thing. Like it's so rewarding. It's like really so individualized and allowing the science to push for like what a student might need in terms of their learning experience. It's cool because it's like makes such a transformative impact on like not only that student but also their family. Like their parents and their families are so committed to this process that when you see like how it all kind of becomes an ecosystem with the trainers and the directors at the center, the students and their families, like I've just never witnessed such a community feeling at any other place that I've worked at, to be very honest, where it's like embedded into really the people's personal stories and their lives and what that means for them. So that's something that's really, really rewarding and really special.
Yeah, that's awesome. My last question has to sum everything up. I want to go back to not just your purpose, but your name. And I saw this when I first met you, like when I was doing research. I found this, and then I went on Wikipedia to verify it, and it's and I was like, okay, I can ask this question. So your name in Hindi means faith and determination. I think that was something I found when I first heard about, first like met you back in 2023. I don't know if that's something you're well aware, but I do want to ask you, because it means faith and determination, how often are you using your name as motivation to help you with what you're going through and what you hope to achieve in the future? Because even though it's a name, names have meaning, and it can definitely serve as an inspiration in knowing that there's a reason why you're given this name, and it's up to you as to how you want to, like, the type of, not the type of relationship you want to have, but it's up to you in terms of how you want to, I guess, use, like, not, what's the word, it's like it's not just a name, but it's like it kind of it can push you remembering that you're given this name for a reason. It's not just someone just put it on you, but there's a hidden meaning behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something that like I don't think about it like too often, but there's been times where I come back to it and I think I see the like sense of committedness and the sense of like willpower and persistence that I continue to somehow find even when I'm at rock bottom and I feel like nothing's gonna go as planned. It's this weird sense of like unshakable faith that I will get to where I want to be. I think this past year has been an absolute testament to that, the past 2 years. But I think about it like sometimes and I'm like, okay, well you had this before, you had this when things are going well, but now it's time to put it to the test. Like, do you still have it now? So in some ways I take myself back to that. My grandfather was the one who gave me that name. And so yeah, I think there's times where I'm just like, well, try and remind yourself to see like in yourself what he saw in you. So yeah, like I said, it's not something that I think about too frequently, but it has come up a couple times in this past year, like when I've had challenges. But you're spot on with the whole, I love that you looked it up on Wikipedia. You're spot on with yeah, the definition is uh faith or determination. So it's definitely something that I feel is just like a tenet to like who I am as a person.
I know you are a very busy person, but I just want to say that was, first of all, that was a great way to end the conversation. So I do appreciate you sharing that, and I hope that you continue to remember that you're an amazing person and that you're going to inspire so many people. So, Nista, I just want to say, like I said, I know I took a lot of your time, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. It was really great meeting you and getting to know you on a very personal level. So thank you so much for being able to share your experiences. Best of luck with everything, whether it's in the present or in the future. And I hope we get to meet in person because we've had many interactions, but we've never had an in-person interaction. So that's something I
Yes,
really
we'll
hope we
change
can
that.
do.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you so much for having me. It was like such a pleasure to be here and like connect with your community and your listeners and seeing like I was telling you on the phone the other day, seeing your growth with the podcast since like we first talked to now has been just like so amazing. It just makes me so happy. It was like telling, I was on the phone the other day. I was like, I feel like your big sister, but it's just such a community, I think, like being in a creator's like ecosystem. We just kind of find each other weirdly. And so yeah, just very happy for you, the work that you're doing, the stories that you're like showcasing here on the show, I think are so special and transformative and just like grateful that I got to kind of be a snippet in that. But thank you so much, Hamza, for having me and like anyone who does want to connect. Like I'm sure my links will be below, so totally feel free to reach out and say hi. And yeah, I just want to thank you once again.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.